name is Russ, and welcome to the CapEx IndustryCast. This is where we go live at 11:30 Eastern Time every Wednesday. And so super excited to have you today. Last week, we had someone on from Assembly Magazine. John came on and talked to us about the capital equipment outlook. So our mission here at CapEx is to continually be serving and adding value to our customers. That's why we exist and why we bring this IndustryCast to you every week. Next week, we're going to be more technology based. We're going to be talking about artificial intelligence. So stay tuned for that. I've got a good friend of mine that's going to join to share his latest that he's developed with regards to artificial intelligence. So super excited to have him on board. But today we're going to talk about our philosophy and how we use explanatory style. That is the monologue or dialogue that we have inside of our heads to either enhance our lives, to encourage us, or to demotivate us, or get us in a state of helplessness that we can often suffer from. So first, let's talk about CapEx real quick. 85% of our business there at ATC Automation is with repeat customers. I always say that, but it's so important because in the automation world, in the capital equipment world, there are a lot of one and dones out there where companies, you have one project, the company botches it up, and then you never buy from them again. But ATC, 85% of their business every single year is with customers that they've already done business with. So that says a lot about them, how they do business, and the projects, as well as their follow through, which the follow through is the key because not every project is a success. Cincinnati Test Systems is the largest leak test company in the world. I love saying that because when I started working with them, they were maybe a $4 or $5 million company. But over the years, they have grown and expanded through just organic growth as well as mergers and acquisitions. And it's been phenomenal to watch them grow into the company that they are today. Duquesne Plastic Joining is a global and diverse plastic welding company. So all things plastic welding, ultrasonic welding, hot plate welding, hot gas welding, spin welding, laser welding, you name the welding for plastics, that's what they do. Wonderful company to work with. They're very customer oriented and they are global. They have Japan, Mexico, Europe, they are everywhere. And then Keller Technologies right here in Fort Mill, South Carolina. They do industrial air filtration, wet and dry air filtration. All right. So now we always start these conversations out with talking about the challenge that we face. So in the world that we are today, in thinking about depression and how it is so pervasive, it's such a part of our world these days, and really creates a cloud over us. And it's driven a lot by the social media that we experience on a regular basis. It's driven a lot by the dialogue that we see or the narrative with the news and the negative newscast, because they've proven that negative news is going to grasp our attention. So we have a tendency to gravitate toward that negative news. That's what captures our attention, and that's why the news media learned many, many, many years ago, as well as the politicians, that negativity sells, and that's why they use it to try to get you hooked and in their sphere of influence, which obviously is very negative, and it just further exacerbates that tendency toward depression that we're experiencing in our society. I mean, it is pervasive. The natural dialogue around depression is that it is a chemical imbalance, which it is. That is the result of our explanatory style. It doesn't necessarily, now in some cases it does, but as a general rule, depression doesn't start from a chemical imbalance. It is the result of our explanatory style that directs that and causes our body to react, because the mind and the body are absolutely connected. They are not separate. They are one and the same. The gut is connected to the brain. Science is continually expanding that body of knowledge as it relates to how that connection works. They don't know exactly, but it is there. So our mind triggers the release of the chemicals that ultimately are causing us to suffer from depression. So that's what we're gonna dig into today. So our explanatory style determines how we experience the world and will determine how we deal with adversity. Because what's important is when we experience adversity, we have a failure. There is a challenge in a relationship that we have. When we experience that adversity, how we talk to ourselves about that issue is paramount to whether we are going to get through it in a positive way, where we are going to come on the other side of whatever the challenge is and be in a situation to where we can use that, leverage that experience for a better future. But if we have a negative or pessimistic explanatory style, it is likely that we are going to continue to suffer. And the result of the adversity is going to be prolonged anxiety, depression, any number of conditions that will result. So the good news, and this is absolutely scientifically proven, it's not me making up crap as a positive Pollyanna. We can reprogram our explanatory style. And I'm going to tell you, I struggled in the end of Q4. The last few months have been a real challenge for me personally. I wasn't as motivated, excited, and energized as I normally am, and that got to me. I was concerned, and so I bought the books. That's what I tend to do, is buy the books that are going to help me understand what I might be going through. So I started studying our well-being, happiness, and I studied Dr. Martin Seligman, who's who I really focused on. He is one of the fathers of positive psychology. Now, again, don't get a negative connotation with positive psychology. It's not positive affirmations. It's not affirming stuff that doesn't exist. Positive psychology is really about being optimistic about the future as opposed to being pessimistic. And we're going to get into those details a little later. So as I was struggling at the end of last year, I felt helpless in one of the ventures that I'm involved with, and that's not me. That's not normally how I am. I'm not a person that suffers from a lack of action. And that's really what helplessness is for us. Helplessness, when we feel helpless, it's as though we can't help our situation. But the reality is that through either our focused attention and mainly our actions, we can change our circumstances. So again, we can reprogram our explanatory style. And our explanatory style is that conversation that we have in our head about whatever it is that's happening in our lives. And it goes on, it's nonstop, no matter what, it's going, even when if you're meditating. And I meditate nearly every day for at least 20 minutes. And I still, I have the monologue going on in my head, and I try to focus on the breath. But part of the practice is you drift off and then you bring it back. You drift off and you bring it back. That is the practice. That is the work. It's just like shooting baskets. If you want to get really good at shooting basketball, or if you want to get good at playing golf, you practice your golf shots. So understanding our underlying explanatory style can really help us determine if we could benefit from a change. And in this book, Learned Optimism, there is actually a survey that you can take that helps you to understand, what your level of optimism is in your life. And I have to tell you, I took this at the end of last year, and I was slightly pessimistic. The people that know me, they said, "Oh my God, what are you talking about? You're not pessimistic." Well, I'm outwardly optimistic and positive to the people that I'm dealing with on a day-to-day basis. But evidently the dialogue, the monologue that's going on in my head has a slight bit of pessimism. Well, I didn't recognize that. And I can definitely see how that was impacting my mood and my outlook on life at the end of last year. So I've really worked to change that to be in a more optimistic style and really focus on that explanatory style. All right, so understanding your explanatory style. So what are your honest answers to the following question? Actually, it's not, I don't think there's a series of questions. It's really a question. When I experience adversity, how do I respond? How do you respond to adversity? There are 3 P's that we're going to talk about and that Martin Seligman talks about in Learned Optimism. And another wonderful book that he has, but that we're going to be talking about here in a little bit. But there are three things. Do you take it personal? So that adversity, do you take it personal? And do you believe it to be permanent? Is whatever's happened in your life, do you say, gosh, this is how it's always going to be? And do you consider it pervasive, as in all aspects of your life, or it's always going to be this way? Always and never are two words that really can help us understand if we've got a negative or pessimistic explanatory style. Keep that in mind as we talk through this. So do you take things personally? That's the P. You got to understand. So this always happens to me. That's what the pessimist would say. Do you see it as pervasive? So everything in my life sucks, or it's always this way. That is really important that we recognize when we are applying whatever's happened to our lives to all aspects of our life. And then, do you describe this as permanent? It's always going to be this way, always, 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 or never. I never get what I want. This never goes right for me. And those are the more permanent conversations that we can have with ourselves. Again, we want to understand, what's that dialogue? What is our narrative that we're continually working through and running through our head? So why does explanatory style matter? So study after study has proven that our explanatory style determines if we will experience depression. That is what Martin Seligman determined in the thousands of studies of the thousands of people that he has studied, is that people that have a pessimistic explanatory style will experience depression. It's just a matter of when they're going to experience depression. Now, the level of pessimism that the person uses in explaining things to themselves, that will determine the level of depression that they're going to experience. So if they are just minorly pessimistic, then their depression will be minor, but they will experience depression in some form. And again, that the determination of how long that depression is going to last is dependent on the level of pessimism the person uses when explaining the adversity or failure or challenges that they're facing in their lives. So people with a pessimistic explanatory style will experience depression in their lives. The level of depression determines their level of pessimism determines their level of depression. So people with an optimistic explanatory style will not experience depression. Now, people with an optimistic style, now they still experience setbacks. When adversity strikes, they get down. We all get down. When they fail, they get down. But people that are optimists, that believe in a better future, they get up more readily. Again, they don't pretend that it didn't happen. They acknowledge it, they pick themselves up, they dust themselves off, and they move on. So that is where the pessimist and the optimist, really the roads diverge in how they respond to what has happened in their lives. Both get down. We all get down when we fail. But the optimist is going to get back up and going to take action. And that is the key. Action, action, action. Not giving in to the helplessness that we often experience when we have a failure or experience adversity. So we believe it's personal, it's pervasive, and it's permanent. Those three P's will crush us. They will cause high levels of depression if we don't manage them through our more optimistic explanatory style. So we can rewire our conversations. And here's some ideas and concepts that Martin Seligman talks about in the book on how we can kind of rewire and have better conversations with ourselves. Because what happens is we tend to ruminate when things happen in our lives. So we experience something, maybe we have an argument with our spouse or with a friend or with a colleague, and we ruminate, right? We have that argument over and over and over again. That's called rumination. And there's really no value in experiencing that argument over and over and over again, but it's going to drive us into, again, a more depressive state. The key is to have to break up that rumination, to stop it so that we don't continue to relive these tragedies or challenges or issues failures, adversity that we're experiencing in our lives. So it's important to keep that in mind. So Martin Seligman here talks about the ABC method, and then he adds D&E to this. So A is adversity. So we experience adversity. B is our behavior during that adversity. And then C are the consequences that are associated with that behavior. So those ABC. So oftentimes when we haven't done this study, when we don't know, we just naturally move through the ABC. So we experience adversity, we behave in a way that is either positive or negative, and then there are consequences associated with the behavior that we had. So we're driving down the road, we get in an accident, and we go belligerent on the person that we had the accident with. There is an argument, a fight that ensues, and then there are, the consequences associated with that particular behavior that we demonstrated. So the ABCs, we need to, what we can do is we can work through what's called disputation. And disputation is essentially the conversation that we would have if we have a dispute with someone else. If we have a dispute with a friend, a colleague, someone, a spouse, when we have a dispute, that is a natural progression that we have when we argue for something that we believe in. That is what a positive disputation might be. So let's talk about it. So it's a logical argument. That's what disputation is. And so what we want to do is we want to consider the evidence about whatever it is that we've done. So we use evidence to prove how internal rumination is incorrect. So we want to essentially dispute our internal dialogue, that explanatory style, when it goes negative. Again, not to be Pollyanna, not to just pretend like everything is correct, but really put this into perspective. That's what we want to do. We want to put our negative monologue into perspective. So here's an example. So you blew your diet. You had a pizza and some wings, and so the evidence is so you're down on yourself. You're a glutton. You can't stick to anything. You're undisciplined. These are the stories that we tell ourselves. This is the explanation that we give ourselves about something that we've committed to, but then we break that commitment to ourselves. So we get down on ourselves and we have that rumination. We're angry, we're frustrated, right? So you blew your diet, but the evidence is that for 2 weeks you stuck to your diet. It was very strict. You adhered to it. Now one night you went a little sideways. That's not the end of the diet. And that's the evidence. So the evidence is that you have been doing good. You've had success in your diet. You had a situation where, okay, you had a piece of pizza and you had a few wings. That's a single occurrence. It's not permanent, right? It's not a permanent part. It is temporary. So understanding that, and it's not all aspects, because you've proven to be a successful dieter prior to this one night where you fell off the wagon. So that is where we can use evidence as a part of our disputation. Continuing this conversation, if we don't use evidence, maybe we could use an alternative explanation. So in other words, is there a less destructive way of looking at the situation, the adversity, the failure, the challenge, whatever it is that you're experiencing? What is an alternative explanation that you could use? Here's a challenge, right? So I can't do this work. It's too hard for me. I'm too old. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. So these are, say we've had a challenge with work and we've got something new that we're trying to attempt. So we begin with that destructive and pessimistic conversation in our head about, this is our lives. We can't learn anything new. It's always going to be this way. And it's me. Now, an alternative explanation could be, this work is certainly a challenge, right? So we're not denying the fact that it's a challenge for us, but it appears that I will need to work harder than my younger colleagues in order to grasp the content. So-and-so is successful at doing the work. So we maybe find another person in this space, or that is an example of someone that is similar to us that has had success. And then that gives us, again, an alternative story to tell, as opposed to the story that this is the way that it is, and we should just give up. So implications. All right. So this is another one. So we've got implications as another way. So how can you what's called decatastrophize? Now I don't know if that's a word or not, but that's what we talk about. So a situation. So we have a tendency to, it's the end of the world when things happen in our lives. We say, "Oh my gosh, this is the worst thing ever." But we know in reality that we're being dramatic. We tend to be overly dramatic about the challenges that we face in our lives. So, in other words, is it really the end of the world? So, what are the implications? Is it really the end of the world, or will the consequences of the failure be less impactful in our lives? So, what are the true implications? Okay, you had a piece of pizza and some wings. Does that mean you're an undisciplined loser? Going back to that diet reference, or the work is challenging for you. Does that mean you'll never learn it? Back to our work example. So that if we turn around, the implications are they really as dramatic as we're making them out to be? Understanding that can be, again, a way to dispute the problems or the challenges in our mind. So let's talk about the usefulness. So this is another alternative, another way to dispute what's going on and how we're dealing with and addressing challenges in our lives. How helpful is it for you to hold on to this thought? One of the examples in a book, this guy is diffusing a bomb and he starts to talk to himself about whether he is qualified to diffuse this bomb. Now, is it a right time? Is it useful for him to be talking to himself about the fact that he is not qualified to be diffusing a bomb? No, that's not the right time, right? Because he will be more likely to start shaking, to get nervous, to begin to doubt his skills and ability. And as a result, potentially blow himself up in the process. So that was, one example. So we hold on to negative thoughts that will inevitably lead to quitting. So this could be in the case of our diet. When we talk about the diet, we end up quitting our diet because we don't let go of that negative thought about our failure. So how useful is that thought in serving you long term? When it is time to perform, we need to ask ourselves, is it functional for me to maintain this thought right now? So again, referring back to the person that's diffusing a bomb, is it helpful? Is it functional? Is it conducive to him diffusing the bomb by having a negative thought about his ability to do so? The reality is no. So we don't ignore that. So we say, okay, here's the answer is no. So now let's document the thought and move on, right? Let's document the thought and move on, not continue to lament on it and ruminate on that thought. So that is the usefulness way of disputing something that's going on in our lives. Let's talk about well-being and happiness. So we're kind of pivoting from learned optimism to an approach of experiencing more well-being and happiness in our lives. The book that Martin Seligman has out there, it's called, I'm forgetting the name of the dang book at the moment, but his book is really about happiness and well-being. It is a wonderful book, but he gives us an acronym. It's called PERMA, PERMA. We're going to talk about that. But if you want to experience more happiness and more well-being in your life, it's important to focus on these 5 components. You want more of these 5 components in your life. And the people that do, they have a much greater sense of well-being. So, all right, here we go. PERMA. Number 1, positive emotions. How many positive emotions are you experiencing in your life? Ask yourself that question. What gives you and feeds you these positive emotions? It's likely going to be the relationships that you have, the experience that you have, the success at your work, the challenges with your work, the success of a child or a family member or a spouse in there. So we derive positive emotions in our lives, and the positive emotions create a greater sense of well-being and happiness. And we really want to manifest as many positive emotions in our lives as possible. Again, We want to put on a defense against depression, and this is the defense against depression. It isn't. It isn't acrimony. It isn't more pessimism. It isn't more negativity. That causes depression. We are looking for the emotions that are going to help us move away from depression and experience more well-being, happiness, satisfaction, fulfillment. That's what we want more of in our lives. And if you cultivate more positive emotions, that is what you're going to experience. I guarantee it. It's scientifically proven. I'm not making it up. All right, next is engagement. So we want to be engaged. We want to be engaged in our work. We want to be engaged in our relationships. We want to be engaged in our lives. And it's difficult these days to be engaged when we are stuck to a phone looking at Facebook or social media. Now, I realize I'm streaming live on Facebook today and hopefully putting out some level of positivity and energy that is going to trigger someone to make some changes. And that's why I'm putting it out there. But it's difficult to feel engaged in life when we're looking at a business. Social media is a business that is created and curated to draw us in and to really steal our joy, because we end up just focused on what others have that we don't have, the compare and despair, everything that goes along with that. So we need to step away from the electronics and the television and engage in our relationships, engage in others. Then we're going to experience higher levels of well-being and happiness in our lives. This is the most important from my perspective. I totally believe in this one. Relationships. Nothing matters more than the relationships in our lives. Just that's it. Barna, period. If we want to experience well-being and happiness and satisfaction, we are social creatures. We do life together. It's important that we have relationships that are built on optimism, positivity, belief in one another. Have people that are going to lift you up, help you to feel better, not cut you down, not focus on what you're doing wrong. You want people that are going to build you up and give you hope for your life, and you can give them in turn hope for theirs. Meaning and purpose. It is important that we are engaged in meaningful work, in meaningful activities, in serving our community, and in helping others, in increasing our value in service of others, right? So how are we cultivating meaning? The more meaning we have in our lives and in our work, then the greater sense of well-being and happiness and satisfaction that we're going to experience, period. All right, next, accomplishment and achievement. So in order for us to experience the highest levels of well-being and happiness, we need to cultivate our accomplishment. We need to have a level of accomplishment and achievement. This doesn't mean success in a monetary form. It could, but the reality is in our vocation or in our craft or in the nonprofit that we're serving, we want to feel accomplished. We want to experience a level of achievement. And when we do so, that enhances our well-being and happiness. Next, all right, let's talk about the pessimist so go from pessimist to optimist. So stop focusing on what is wrong with the world and consider what is right. Many years ago, I watched a video, and this gentleman was a photographer for the National Geographic. And he talked about how when he would go to photo places, he would get there sometimes and it would be the wrong time of year, or maybe he was delayed and he got there late. He talks about a field of dandelions that he went to take pictures of for National Geographic. He got delayed. By the time he got there, the yellow fields and hills of dandelions had turned into what he called puffballs. And so obviously he was despondent, he was frustrated, he was negative, he was pessimistic, he was down about the fact that he had gone there to shoot this wonderful set of beautiful yellow covered dandelion hills, but he found puffballs. But the pictures that he took of those puffballs, he was able to discover what was right. But it wasn't until after he developed, now this is back in the time when you developed film, but it wasn't until after he developed the film that he understood, and he had this appreciation for the fact that, when he got there and it wasn't the way that he wanted it, he was focused on what was wrong. He was angry, he was frustrated, but he just started taking pictures. He started doing what he does. And when he got home and he developed the pictures, He found what was right with the situation and that it was the right time for him to be there. And the pictures that he took were just absolutely phenomenal. So, okay, next, don't take everything personal. It is okay to blame a little bit. So everything isn't personal, right? I mean, some things happen and it wasn't your fault. And that's okay. You don't have to accept blame for every single freaking thing that goes on in your life. It's okay to defer some of that, defer some of that blame. Now, I'm not saying go around and blame the world, but it is important, scientifically proven, again, I'm not making this stuff up, that when we do deflect some of the blame, some of the responsibility for things that have happened, some adversity, failures, challenges, that it can help us to rebound more quickly. So that's what. But if we take it personal, then that can inhibit our ability to rebound as quickly as we would ideally rebound. Every setback is temporary. Everything is temporary. Obviously, I know from a health perspective, there are health setbacks that are permanent, and so I don't want to dismiss those. There are relationship challenges that we experience that are going to be maybe permanent from that perspective. But in general, with exceptions, there are a few exceptions. Every setback that we experience in life is temporary, and seeing it as such, again, will help us to recover and bounce back if we look at those with a more optimistic outlook. So everything in the world is not wrong. If you watch the news media, if you listen to the politicians, that's what you're going to believe. That's what you're going to begin to believe about the world. That's what we see. That's why we have just so much tremendous unrest in our world, is because everyone is obsessing about everyone else, as opposed to realizing and accepting what their impact is on the world. We're going to talk a little bit about that as well. So we need to learn to dispute our negative thoughts. That's how we can move from the pessimist to the optimist. We talked about disputation and how we can interrupt our rumination. So stop rumination with intentional diversion or a redirect. And that's possible sometimes by just slamming your hand on the wall and saying no or stop, which sounds crazy, but it is proven that is one way. That is a cognitive therapy technique that they use to help people stop the rumination process by intentionally interrupting it. Next, all right, so let's talk about the sphere of influence. If you have read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of my favorite books of all time, Stephen Covey talks about the sphere of influence. And the way I want you to think about this is, if you can touch it, if you take your arms and you extend them out, if you can touch it, that is your sphere of influence. And our sphere of influence is fairly small, right? It's we don't have typically thousands and thousands of relationships out there that are part of our influence. So understanding that we can touch it, then we can impact it, right? And those are typically, we're talking relationships that are in our lives. If it is the government, if it is from something in the news, the corporations, things that are going on, and and you can't touch it. If your hand can't reach out and touch it, then it is not within your sphere of influence. Now, that doesn't mean that it doesn't matter, but it is important that you take that into consideration. So stretch your arms out, and what you can touch is in your sphere of influence. All right. Continue through. My battery, I forgot to plug in today. Hey, that happens. So stretch your arms, focus on anything. So remember that we only control these 4 things. This is it. If we talk about influence yourself. This is how it works. We control our attitude. We control our response to whatever the situation is. We control our inputs. So again, turn off the news, social media, and all the political rhetoric. And then we control our effort. That's it. Those 4 things, that's all we control. Technically, I don't have control over my hand. My brain is telling my hand to go, but sometimes we lose that control. But the control that I always have is the control that's going on up here. And that's the attitude, my response, my inputs, and my effort toward whatever is going on in my life. All right, in summary, so we blame a chemical imbalance for the cause of depression. The cause of depression begins with the voice in our head, the explanatory dialogue. That's what causes the chemical imbalance. It's not typically a naturally occurring chemical imbalance. It's a chemical imbalance due to the fact that we have not been taught, we have not learned to manage our explanatory style and turn that explanatory style into a positive or optimistic explanatory style. Instead of, again, focusing on what's wrong with the situation, let's focus on what's right with the situation. So I want to encourage you, if this is a problem, and it is pervasive and it's a big part of our society right now, seek professional help. There are plenty of people out there that are qualified to help you if you are experiencing a level of depression. And there's nothing shameful about it. It's really important that if you need help, you get help. Talk to someone, and they can help you with CBT, the cognitive behavioral therapy that we've been talking about in some of the ways we deal with this stuff here. Is your voice positive or negative? So I'm not suggesting, again, that we be Pollyannic about what's going on, but we do have an opportunity to control the narrative in our head as far as what we want versus focusing on what we don't want, which is what we tend to do. We tend to focus on what we don't want. Therefore, we don't get what it is that we want. We almost always get what we don't want if that's what we're focusing on. So be realistic. It's important to not be overly dramatic, right? Live in the real world. What is reality? Don't make stuff up. Keep a gratitude journal. I found that to be very helpful. Every night, I write down 3 things that I'm grateful for that day. And oftentimes it's about people and our relationships that I'm grateful for. So associate with optimistic people. Get around people that, again, build you up, help you feel better, that are optimistic about the future. Recognize rumination when it's going on in your head. Learn techniques, strategies for helping to interrupt that rumination. So learn disputation. Like we talked about earlier, dispute the negative assessment that you're making in your brain. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you so much. That is a topic, again, that's near and dear to my heart right now. I'm experienced it late last year, worked through that, and had just an amazing 2021 so far, and really excited about the year moving forward. So what topics would you like to cover here on the Industry Cast? As I mentioned, next week, we're going to be talking with Rico Pettizzano, a good friend of mine, about artificial intelligence. So look forward to having him on and having some discussion about what he knows out there in the world. So as it relates to moving forward, if you need anyone in South Carolina, Matt Matheny has been supporting us. He's actually covering Western North Carolina as well. Chris Mullins there in Eastern North Carolina and Virginia. And I'm playing a support role in helping these guys go out there and help you every single day. That is our mission. We are grateful for the opportunity to serve you. And hopefully there was some positive takeaways that you got from this messaging today. Have an amazing day. Appreciate you. And want nothing but the best for you, and hope that you have positive discourse every day with yourself. Learn to change and alter your explanatory style. Cheers.